No. Okay, Ron, I'll turn it over to you.
Okay. All right. Well, hello, everyone. As Dan said, this is Ron. If I get my screen set up correctly, we can actually do some useful work here. So this is the advanced report session. We're scheduled to go for a couple of hours. Just based on past experience with this session, a lot of times people have not really had a chance to get in and play with reports. So I was looking at the demo site earlier at your reports tab. And so it looks like Stan and maybe Karen or Corinne has been in, editing and playing around with reports. Does it sound like a fair statement to say the other people on the call have not really had a chance to get in and edit reports and play around with them?
This is Stan. I would assume most haven't got into reports yet.
Okay. All right. So what I will do then is I'll just proceed with kind of a standard introduction to building and editing reports. So as probably everybody on the call knows, there's a big difference in LegalServer between people who can run reports and people who can add new reports, edit existing reports, and so forth. And so we're talking about the second group, report writers is what I call them. So you should on your site have the edit pencil when you look at the main reports page like I have here. So most of your folks will not have this little edit pencil here. So reports, I always like to start off with telling people they are not rocket science, but you will not really get reports just sitting down and, a half an hour later, it's like, oh yeah, I know how to build and edit reports and I know what's going on and, and I can go from here. So some of you might, but most people don't. I know I certainly didn't when I started learning reports, and most people I talk to are like, yeah, this takes a little while. So it's not rocket science, but there are a lot of little pieces to it. So the first thing that I'm going to point you to, is hopefully you've seen already at some point, is our help site, help.legalserver.org. That's publicly accessible. If you haven't been to it, you can get to it. You don't have to be logged into LegalServer to get to it. And the third link from the bottom on the main page is the reports manual. Reports manual is, it's kind of a long page. There's a lot of information here, but you will save yourself a lot of time if you're going to be building and editing reports to just give this a once through is what I tell people. So don't approach it with, I've got to memorize everything that's on here, but just give it a read through. Some people like to print it, take it out on the back porch with a cold drink and, read through it. That'll just be really helpful to you. So this is all the new stuff, how do I create a new report? How do I delete a report, which you can't, you'll find out. And then what are all these different links I'm going to see when I get into edit mode on a report. Also over on the reports manual is the example reports page, which I'll open that up in another browser tab. One of the things that you'll learn about with LegalServer reports is you can import and export them. And we're not talking about importing and exporting your data. We're talking about importing and exporting the structure of a report. And that's what this page is all about. So we've added a lot of reports to this page over the years. Some people have asked us to build different reports and show them how to do certain things. So we've gone in and exported various reports, and then we've put the link to the XML file that you can download here. You don't need to know what an XML file is. All you need to know is you download a file to your computer, you go back to your site, and you issue the import command. You'll pick that file off of your computer, and that will create the report on your site. And again, the report is not going to have any data from any other site. It'll be run with your data. Now, depending on the filters and so forth, you know, initially when you run an imported report, you may see nothing, but that can be helpful as well. The other thing that I will point out on the reports manual, the last section is a great big section. It's called the nuggets section. So this is, you know, I want to report on something in LegalServer. So I know we've got some custom fields. You know, where do I find those custom fields in the report editor? So we've got a link to the custom fields section here. And so all of these different little sections will tell you, you know, where to go in the report editor, excuse me, to find something. And all these little references, like, you know, custom fields are on the case data. Well, extended matter you probably don't have, but the case data custom table. So that right now probably means nothing to you, but I'll show you, and then hopefully before we get done today, that'll start making sense and what those references are meaning. So this is a good place to come. You know, if you're looking for something and you don't know where to find it in reports. The final thing that I'll mention before we get into actually walking through editing a report, well, we'll build a report from scratch first, and then we'll go in and play around and edit it, is getting help on reports. So if you're like most people, you're going to need help on reports at some point, especially, you know, finding things. So you can always get help from us when you're editing reports, and we just ask for a couple of things. One is, and you can send requests for help on reports to our standard support@legalserver.org address. So we just ask for a couple of things. One is a link to the report that you're working on. And so we know exactly which report it is. You know, so people will send us requests and they'll say, I'm working on the, you know, the staffing report. We'll go over to the site and there'll be, you know, literally 12 different reports that say staffing. We don't have no idea which one you're talking about. If you send us a link to the report, we can click on that link and go directly to the report, and we know we're working, you know, on the report that you have a question about. The other thing that we ask that people do is come to the nugget section and, you know, look for whatever it is. So if you're trying to get, you know, client addresses into a report, then, you know, this is going to explain to you how to do it. But, you know, if you get stuck, you can always feel free to help us or contact us. We also, most Mondays at 4 p.m. Eastern, we have a report hour, which is open for anybody to join. It's a Zoom session like this, and anybody's free to join. You don't have to pre-register or anything like that. That's usually me that runs that, but sometimes it's different people. We have several different what we call office hours like that. The one on reports, you know, you're free to join if you have questions. Some people join just to kind of hang out and listen to, you know, other questions people have and see if they can pick something up that's interesting to them. All right, so let's flip over to your demo site, and I'm going to go ahead and work on your demo site. If at any point, you know, there's specific questions about a report on your live site, we can certainly look at that. But I'm going to work off the demo site so I can play around here and, you know, not create reports that are going to clutter up your live site. So most people find it helpful to walk through creating a report from scratch. In terms of creating reports, you know, you've got a couple different ways that you can do it. So you can import a report from somewhere else, like the example reports page. You can also come into an existing report. So I'll just take an example here, this age open cases report based on last time entry. So if you've run this report before and you know, like, you know, yeah, that report's like really close to what I want, but, you know, I want to make some changes to it. You can, you know, click the edit pencil on any existing report. And inside the report, you have a save as link. And this is just like when you say save as in Word or Excel or, you know, most any other software that you're used to. You would come in here, give it a name, click on continue. That report would then show up in your reports list, but you wouldn't be changing the underlying report. So if you know the report that you just want to be careful about it, you can always do that. Or if you know that people rely on the one report, you can come in and edit it, click save as, and then you would be editing the new, and it's not a version of that report, it's literally a copy of that report. So that's a couple different ways that you can create a new report. You can also create a report from scratch. To do that, on the main reports page, you go to the actions menu and you say you want to add a new report. So the first thing you have to do is give the report a name. So I'm just going to say this is our Z training report. I just do that even on the demo site. So that way, this report, if I leave it active so that it shows up in the list by default, it'll float down to the bottom of the list. Then the information to base the report on, which I call the top level table of the report. So if I drop down this list, the default is case data. And that's just because some large percentage of the time when people are creating new reports is they want to report on case data. There is a long list of different top level tables that you can select from here. Case data is the biggest one. A couple of the others that you may use are like timekeeping. And then you also have some more specialized tables. There's outreach, which you're probably not going to be using. There's also a system users top level table that you can use. The importance of the top level table is it determines what data you can get to. So just as an example, I don't know if you all keep anything other than case time, but in LegalServer, there's 3 types of time that you can record. Time that's linked to a case, time that's linked to an outreach record, and then time that's linked to neither one of those. The latter is sort of the classic as administrative type time, leave time, and so forth. So it's time that you want to record in the system, but it's not linked to anything else. It's just sort of a standalone time slip. So using that as an example, if I wanted to report on time in the system, but I'm only interested in time slips that are linked to cases, then I could go ahead and use the case data top level table because that has a path into time slips, but only time slips that are linked to cases. In contrast, if I wanted to report on case time, all other time, outreach time, etc., I would want to start with the top level timekeeping table, because that will let me get at all time slips within the system. All right, so I'm just going to say case data. We can put in some notes that would appear at the top of the report. I'll go ahead and put in, just so you can see where those show up. These aren't required. These can be very helpful, though, if there are people that are going to be running reports and there's something very specific about the report. So, you're setting up, the XYZ report that people have to, run every month or so to get some numbers or whatever it happens to be. And there's a very specific way they should, be running that report, the filters they should be applying and so forth. It might be helpful to put that information up at the top of the page for them. All right, so I click on next. That takes us to step 2. This is the add columns page, and we're going to see this page in another spot too once the report is created. This is our first chance to add some fields to this report. Now this page, you might be able to tell, I don't know if you can see my scroll bar over to the right, but it's very small. This is a very long page. I won't scroll all the way down through it. The top of the page is what we call the report library, and you all as report writers control what shows up in this list. Some people call this like the quick bookmark list for fields, shortcuts and so forth. Typically, it's a relatively small list, and it's for fields that are going to be used over and over in reports. So things like the assigned office, date closed, date open, disposition, legal problem code, matter, case ID, and so forth. There's a lot of other fields down in these other sections down here. This is not going to be all of the fields that you can report on. So this is a subset of all the fields you can report on. So typically what I tell people, you can select as many fields as you want. So for case type reports, you almost always want the case number. You should, on your case reports, always pull in disposition. So hopefully you know by now that matter records in LegalServer, which is what cases are, can have the different dispositions of pre-screen, incomplete intake, pending open closed, or rejected. So disposition is always a good filter to have, or a good field and a good filter to have on your case reports. So I don't know about your previous system, but some people, sometimes they're coming from systems and they want to report on closed cases and they filter on the date closed field, which is fine. But you really should, especially with imported data, you should always filter on disposition to make sure you're getting what you want. But I'll go ahead and add date open and date closed as well. I think you all use case type quite a bit, so I'll grab that as well. I can click any of the buttons on the right. So if you scroll down this page and you've checked other boxes, you can click on any of these buttons. It doesn't matter which one. And these are going to take you to, or this is going to take you to the next step, creating a new report, which is to set some default filters. You're not required to do that at this point. Sometimes that can be very helpful, especially if you have a lot of data in your database. And so I usually start out with something small, and I will just come in and say, for disposition, I just want to start out by just seeing open cases. And that's just in case if you've got 600,000 cases in your system, it's just going to be faster to start working with the report if we're only looking at the open ones. And we'll come back and talk about these filter windows a little more. So that's our initial filter. So I'm going to click next. And so now we are in edit mode on the newly created report. It actually hasn't been saved yet at this point. So if you have a reason, or a need to, if you get to this point with a report and you realize, oh, I've picked the wrong top level table or something, you can just exit away from this page by going anywhere else in LegalServer, and this report won't exist yet. But so that's why typically once I know, I'm going to want to keep a report, is I will come up to the top left and click on Save Changes. And so now this report is saved in the system. And I'll typically, when I'm building reports, depending on how many changes I've made, I'll periodically go up and click on Save Changes, just because, I hate to lose changes that I'm doing to something. So just like in, you're probably used to in Word and some other programs, periodically you want to hit Save Changes so that you don't lose a bunch of stuff. So we've got our report name at the top. You can see the little notes show up there as well. And so what you're seeing is, hopefully everybody here is, run reports, but I guess I probably should back up just in case somebody hasn't. I'm going to go find my Z report. So here's my Z training report. So if somebody comes in and runs a report, so your job as a report writer is to create a report that's got the columns on it that people want to see, also has the filter options that they want, and to set some sensible default filters. So if somebody runs this report, comes in and clicks on Run Report, this is what they're going to see. They're going to see a report that pulls all cases with the disposition of open, and then they're going to get these columns down here. All right, so I'm going to close that up, and let's make some changes to this report so that it might be a little more useful for people. So the first thing I'm going to do is for most reports, sometimes your column order here is not going to be great. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to click on the column heading matter case ID, and I'm going to drag it over to the left. So that's the first column over there. When you drag things around, and a lot of times when you do things, when you're editing reports, you're going to get the click here to reload button is going to come up. You're not required to do that. I can do other things, but if I go ahead and reload the data, then you can see my column is going to be over there and the data is followed along with it. And so, date opened typically makes more sense to see that before date close. So I'll put that there. And if this truly is going to, well, I'll leave disposition there for right now. All right, so I'll go ahead and refresh that. So this looks a little bit better. Typically on most reports too, you want to set a default sort order. So to do that, you put your mouse cursor over a column heading, and then you click one of the triangles. So the upward pointing triangle is going to be an ascending sort. The downward pointing triangle is going to be a descending sort. So I'll make this an ascending sort. Once I did that, then I got this other little line popped up here telling me the ordering of this report. So the sorting. So right now it's just on the one column, matter case ID. All right, so I'm going to come up and click on Save Changes. The next thing I'm going to do is open up the filters section here on the report. And let's just say, I started off with just looking at open cases, but this report, people are going to want to see, typically by default, open and pending cases. So I can come into this filter. There's a lot of things you can do in each one of the filters. So most of the stuff that's in here, you're not going to be using most of the time. The big thing is this little value box here. And so when you click inside the value box, it's going to show you for a lookup field like disposition or race or legal problem code, and so forth. It's going to show you a list of those values that can be selected. Don't know how well it's showing up on the remote end, but open is already kind of grayed out there just to indicate to me it's already been selected. And I can come in and then click on pending to select that as well. I've got a couple of convenience buttons here. I can select all, and we put all the values in there. I can select none. That'll take everything away, but I'll go ahead and reselect open and pending. And then typically you can just click on apply to apply that change to the filter. You've got a button to apply and refresh. So that'll apply the change and immediately refresh the data for you. You also have a cancel button here. So if you make changes to the filter, you realize, I slipped with the mouse or something. And especially if this was like a lookup field and somebody had previously selected, 13 different values, you may want, or you accidentally click on select none or something, and you don't want to, have to go back and reselect all those 13 values. Just click on cancel. That'll cancel any changes you've made. You can also delete a filter from a report, and then you can also delete and refresh the data table. So I'll click on apply and refresh. And I don't think that actually changed our count any. So I'm going to come back up to disposition and also select closed. And surprising, it only gives us 112 cases, but it does give us a different row count here. So while we're looking at something like this, I want to show you on this column for disposition, most of your, not all, but most of your text columns like disposition are going to have the little B symbol at the bottom of the column, and that's going to give you a breakdown count. So I've got 112 results in this report, which is going to be the equivalent of 112 cases. And I can see in the breakdown, 21 of those are closed, 91 of those are currently open. And this breakdown will show up when somebody runs the report as well. So I could do the same thing like on another text column like case type. If I click the breakdown there, I can see the case type. I've got 85 appointed, 3 county, and so forth. Notice on the breakdowns, it doesn't show you, that there's a certain number that are blank. So obviously we've got some cases with no case type here. So we don't give you a count of the blank values. Hopefully we will someday. So that would be nice to have. All right, so I'm just going to come back up here and click Save Changes. And so that's just an example of doing some very basic things with the report. So how you can quickly build a report, get a few columns on it and so forth. So let's start talking about some of the other details that you can, things that you can change in reference to a report. So I'm going to come back up to the top here to the attributes section. There's also a lot of options in here. Most of these you'll never have a need to mess with. The big ones, I always like to point out, one, this is where you can rename a report. So I can come up and call this the Z Training Report of Wonder. By default, the tabular format to show that is going to be checked on all reports. The tabular format is just the columns down here, what I call the data table. So one of the things you'll learn is you can add other things to reports like graphs and crosstabs and so forth. You may have an instance where you want to hide all the detail on a report and just show the graph or the crosstab, whatever it happens to be. The system report stuff you don't need to worry about. Run on open is checked by default. That means when somebody runs this report, do they have to click the run report button or will it immediately start loading data? Which one is better or worse just depends on the report that you're building. Typically, if it's a report that people are going to click on, they're going to want to immediately change the filters to something else, then you may want to uncheck run on open. And that way, they don't have to wait for the data to load first. And then once they've changed the filters, they can go down and click on the run report button. There's a view all data when report is opened option. What that would do is by default, your reports are going to show up as, viewing 1 through 20 of however many rows are in the report. You can see in edit mode, you've got some links like view 50 and view all. You have the same thing over in run mode when people are running a report. They'll see similar types of links. Whether or not, you should check view all, again, just depends on the report. So if this report has, if a report has a lot of columns on it and it's going to produce, 120,000 rows of data, having it set to view all means it's just going to take, longer for it every time somebody runs that report for it to load because it's going to be loading 120,000 rows of data. So there are some instances where view all makes sense, but I always caution people to be kind of cautious about using it. The enable nest loop thing's going to be disappearing, doesn't do anything these days. Here's where you can change the notes on the report. The Excel output, very specialized. So if you're going to export things to Excel, you can do it as portrait or landscape. I'm not positive this even does anything anymore. Then you get to another important option here is whether or not this report is active. So as you probably have seen when you go to the main reports page, you and anybody else, by default, it only shows active reports. So if I flip over to my other browser tab, I'm just talking about this default active filter here. So you can't delete reports in LegalServer, but you can mark them inactive so they don't show up in the list by default. You can also, if you want to, kind of belt and suspenders, if you want to, hide a report, set it as not active. And then you can also come up and do something like I did up here, which is start the name of the report with Z. Then that way it'll float to the bottom of the list. The category type, grouping, offices, those don't have anything to do with the substance of the report. Those relate to the various filters that people can use on the reports page itself. Now, the final section here in attributes, this one is important. So this is this roles section. If you've never seen the user roles in your site, these are all the user roles people are, standard LegalServer user roles and also ones that you all have added. These are the people that will be able to run this report. You may have seen on other sessions where, we logged in as a standard user and click on a report to run it. And we get a message, instead of seeing a report, we get a message that says you don't have permission to run this report. So that's what this is related to. So especially on newer sites, that's not uncommon. You build a report, notice that none of these roles are selected by default. So you go build your great report, you get it all set up. Since you're a report writer, you can always run the report. Even if administrator report builder here is not selected, you can run every report. So you get it built, you go tell people, yeah, I've built the great, case staffing report, go run it. It'll just, be the most wonderful thing you've ever seen. Then you're going to hear back from them saying, hey, I went and clicked to try to run the case staffing report. It says I don't have permission. So if that happens, you just need to go in and edit and then say, who should be able to run this report. So I'm going to say, just scroll down through here. So you've got like local office supervisor, several different roles here. In the attribute section, if I make changes, I've got two buttons, apply and refresh. That gets me part of the way there. So I'm going to click on apply. I'm going to scroll back up to the top of the page. Notice that the save changes button is red. So following through with my little scenario there, you build a report, people tell you, hey, don't have permission. So you're like, yeah, I know exactly how to fix that. I'm going to edit the report, go into attributes, add some roles to it, click on apply. They're still not going to be able to run this report because any changes you make in the attribute section, you need to come up and also click on save changes to actually save those changes to the report. So now people with those user roles I selected, they could actually come to this, come to the reports page and click and run this report. So the next section down we want to talk about is filters on reports. So the filters that are here are the ones that, we added when we were creating this report from scratch. And then, the filters here are going to be, whoever's edited this report, those are going to show up here. So if we want to add additional filters, they have to be columns or fields that already exist on the report. So for example, if I wanted to, add the assigned office to this report, I could click in the box here and it's going to show me all of the columns that exist on the report, but assigned office is not going to be in here. So if I want to do that, I need to go add the assigned office to the report first, and then I could come back and add it as a filter. And we'll do that, here in a second, so you can see what that looks like. While we're here on filters, I just want to show you a couple of the different options you're going to get. The options you get for a filter depend on the field type. So we've already seen disposition, which even though it's not a lookup that you all control, like gender, race, and so forth, it is a lookup style field. So when you go to edit it, you're going to get a click in the box and you're going to get the potential values here. Let's look at case type. So case type is also a lookup on your site. So I have a values box here, and if I click inside it, then I can see all the potential case types that you can select from here. And so if I come in, click on appointed, that would filter, and I would only get cases that where the case type equals appointed. There's also a checkbox down here to show inactive. So you may know that lookup values, you can mark them inactive so that people won't see them when they're filling out forms. At times, you may have a need to be able to select inactive values. So if you check that box, that will let you do that. Let's see if you have any inactive ones. Yeah, doesn't look like you do here. But you would see them in the list here, and they would say inactive in parentheses after them. For most of your filters, you can, the default is viewer modifiable. What that means is when somebody runs this report, they'll be able to see the filter when they run the report, and they'll be able to change, whatever values, select whatever values they want for running the report. What you're setting here in edit mode is what you think will be the sensible default values. So for this report, I'm going to say, yeah, people are going to want to run this report. And by default, they're going to only want to see cases that were appointed as the case type. That'll just be a default. When somebody's running the report, they could select any of the other values, or they could take appointed off the, as a filter or as a value in this filter and run the report without it. But as you may know, you're running a report, you can't ultimately change the underlying report. You're only making temporary changes for that session of running the report. The label that people will see when they're open up the filter section when they're running a report, you can change that. There are some circumstances where it might be helpful to do that. You can categorize filters on a report. I never do that. Usually if you get into categorizing filters on a report, that's kind of an indication you may have too many filters, but it's certainly there to do. The reports manual explains how that all works. Then you also have this advanced checkbox down here. So there's a couple of options in advanced. This apply after aggregate, which we're not going to talk about in today's session, but for our purposes here, the advanced is to the order of checking these boxes and what happens here is always getting me confused. So sorry, the advanced is just going to be the apply after aggregate stuff, and then viewer modifiable. You may want to sometimes uncheck that, and that will lock a filter. So people can see the filter, they can see it on the report, and they can see what it's set to, but it'll have a little lock icon next to it, and they won't be able to change it when they run the report. All right, so as before, if you make a change like that, you want to apply it or apply and refresh. So I'll go ahead and do that. You can see we're down to 85 rows there. We're only getting the appointed. Coming back up into the filters, knowing how to use date field filters is important. So all of the date fields, the filters work the same way. The default operator is in the date range. And so that's going to offer you some date presets. And then you also have start and end date boxes that you can manually put in, any dates that you want. I'll drop down this date preset list. And so there's several helpful options in here. So there is, any date or no date set, which just means, you know, it's not going to, by default, there's going to be no filter on date opened. But again, people, unless you uncheck viewer modifiable, people will be able to enter date ranges that they want as they're running a report. You may have a need in some of your reports to, you know, you want to filter on, you know, date opened or some other date field is null. You know, there's no value for it. So to do that, you have the option no date set. If you want to filter for a date field that you don't care what the date is, but you just want to, you know, it's not blank. So it's got something in it. So that's what the any date set is for. Then you have these other presets here. So various ones based on day. And then if I scroll down, you know, you've got like previous week, next week, current week, previous month, current month, previous year, current year, and so forth. The nice thing about these for your reports is if I select, for example, current month, well, let's do current year. So I don't want to get us down on the demo site to no data. But the nice thing about the date presets is these adjust automatically based on the dates. So if I build this report and people run it, they're getting, you know, whatever set of cases based on them being opened in the current year. When they go to run this report in 2022, those dates will adjust automatically. And again, if you don't lock the filter, they can change those if they need to be, but those are, you know, can be nice defaults. So I think, yeah, I'm going to leave it at current year. Well, let's go ahead and let's be bold and try previous month. So I'm going to say I want this report to pull, you know, all the cases that were opened in the previous month, you know, in addition to any other filters that I set. So I'll go ahead and refresh that. Then the final type of field I wanted to show you right now is matter case ID. The matter case ID, if you don't already know, it's a plain text field. So it kind of looks like a number, but you know, it's the number, the year the case was started, then a dash, and then a sequential number, but that's all really just a text field. So your text fields are all going to look like this. The default operator is going to be in the comma separated list, but you have some other options here. So like contains and so forth. If you make a change to and use one of these other operators, this is a good place to change the label. And so change the filter label so it says like matter case ID. And you might want to say something like, you know, contains the text. Because when people run the report and they open up the filters, you know, they're going to see the filter and then they're just going to see a box where they can type some text in. So if you don't tell them that it's looking for a comma separated list of values or something contains the text, then they're not going to know what to put in that box. So since I did that, I'll make it a contains operator. And so we haven't changed our data at this point. All right, so I'm going to click on Save Changes. And I'm just going to add another tab. I'm going to open up our reports list. And notice that you know, just to show you the changes we've made. So I've changed the title so that appears differently. And then notice that the report that loaded data immediately instead of me having to click on run report because I left that run report on open. And then here's the default filters we set. So notice by default that all filters are ANDed together. And all that means is this report is saying, show me all the cases where a case type is appointed and the date open is in the previous month and the current disposition is closed, open, or pending. Notice that my little column breakdowns that I added also show up over here in run mode. Now, if I go up here into the filter options, you can see here's the filters. All of these, you know, I left them as being available, you know, viewer modifiable. So people running the report, they can come in and change the case type filter. They can change the data open filter, disposition, and then finally notice the label that I put on matter case ID. Because again, all they're going to see is a box here. So without that parenthetical label, they're going to not, matter case ID, they may figure out, well, I can type a matter, case number in there. But for a lot of your text fields, they won't really know, what they can put in there and what format they can put things in there. All right, so let's come back over into edit mode. And as you're, editing a report, it's always a good idea to, once you think you're done with your edits, hit your save changes, and then just do what I did, open another tab, and then go run the report, just to confirm what people are going to see, when they go in and run a report. As I mentioned, by default, all of the filters on a report are ANDed together. I'm not going to spend a lot of time talking about it. It's a little bit of an advanced option, but you can create OR filters and reports. And I'll just show you very briefly. If you drag one filter on top of another, it's going to put them into a group, and you can change that group to OR. So this would now be saying, show me all the cases where the case type is appointed and date opened is the previous month, or disposition is closed, open, or pending. So if I reloaded my data here, I should get a lot more columns, and I do. All right, so I'm just going to drag one of those filters out of that group just to break that group, to get rid of it. Our next section here is hidden columns. So hidden columns is going to, by default, it's going to contain one or more ID fields, which you don't really need to worry about, but they have to be on the report for it to function properly. But you can also hide columns manually. So let's just say, for example, I'm filtering down to, let's just say disposition here. So this report, people are going to know that it's, they don't need to know the disposition of individual cases here. And so this column here is just taking up room, cluttering the display. They don't need it. So I can hide columns. To do that, I put my mouse cursor over the column heading and click the little edit pencil. And this opens up the column properties for this column. So inside the column, so the first thing that I was wanting to do here is I wanted to hide this. So I've got a show option here. It's currently set to yes. And I can select hide. And then once I go down and click on apply or apply and refresh, that would hide this column. While we're here inside of the column properties window, you can see that you've got a heading box that will let you change the column heading. This would just be changing the column heading on this report. It's not changing it for all reports in the system. It's not changing, anything within the database, like the name of a column or anything like that. For columns, you'll have various formatting options depending on the type of column it is. So this is text. So I get some options regarding text. I'll show you the column properties in one of the date columns here in a second, which actually demos a little bit better in terms of the changes that you can make. This is one of the places that you can add a filter on a column. I can see that this column is already a filter, and I can see what the filter is set to by default. But if this was empty and I wanted to add disposition as a column, I can use that add filter button. Works the same way as if I was inside of the filters options, up here and selected to add a filter. Either way you can do it. If you make changes to a column like hiding disposition, you want to click on apply or apply and refresh. This is also, as you can probably tell, this is how you can delete a column off of a report. So especially if you started, from another report, you click the edit pencil, clicked on save as, and you've created a new report based on the other one. There may be some columns you want to get rid of. You can certainly do that this way. So I'll click on apply and refresh, and we can see that our hidden column or disposition column has gone up into the hidden section. I'm going to save changes, and I'm going to flip back over to my other browser tab and go ahead and run this report again, just so you can see what effect that had. So now when I run this report, you can see disposition is gone, but it's now up in this data options section that people see when they're running a report. And so if you've run a report, you've seen, looked at data options, you've seen, you've got the two boxes, displayed fields and available fields. So what I did over there is I said, disposition, don't display it by default, but we're going to leave it as an available field. So if somebody wants to see it, they can come over and click on disposition, use the little button to move it over. And they can even, move it around somewhere. And then they can click run report. And if they want to see disposition, there it is. So coming back over to edit mode, let's look at one of these date columns here at the properties. So as I mentioned, the format options that you get here will differ depending on the type of field. So we looked at a text field, and now we're going to look at a date field. So you have some different options here that may be useful in some circumstances. So there is a basic formatting for date fields. So if you have a report and you just, people's preference would be to show it year, month, and day. That's what the basic formatting will do. If this happened to be a date time column, then it would show the date and also the time for that particular field. You get some other options here that, may be useful in some places, show the day of the week number. There's also one called year and month only. So this can be helpful if you're running a report and you want to set up a crosstab to show, like, I want to see the number of cases opened each month by office. Then formatting the date close column as year and month will let you do that fairly easily. And I'll go ahead and format date opened as year and month only. This is just a display thing. It doesn't, your filters up here are still going to work the same. There's still going to be the full dates. That'll all work. So this is just strictly the display here. All right, so also going to go ahead and mention, we're not going to do a lot. We'll see how we're doing on time. The additional display formats, a lot of stuff in here. What this will let you do is add a crosstab summation, some other things to a report. So these are kind of specialized things. A crosstab is probably the one people use the most. And this will just let you set up a chart on a report. So this one's going to be very boring based on the data that we have, but I'm just going to select some values here. We'll do case type. And we will count all. And so let me go ahead and refresh the page so we can see that along with our data. So as I say, this is very boring, but this is to give you a rough idea of what this would do. That's right, we're only doing previous months. Let me expand this so this is maybe a little bit more interesting. So I'm going to go to current year. And while we're here, let's go ahead and Select none and pull in all of the case types. So hopefully what you can see on your screen now is this is just going to create this crosstab. Some people call it a chart, some people call it a matrix. What it's going to do is based on your selections, it's going to create a row for every case type. Then it's going to create a column for all of the dates since I selected date open. Now, if I had left date opened, displayed as full date, so year, month, and day, then I would literally get a column for every day that there was a date that had, a case had been opened. But since I formatted it as year and month, it's going to nicely group all of these things into months like that. And then it's just going to give me counts. So I can see there are 8 cases have been opened in the current year on the demo site that don't have a case type. 4 cases with the appointed case type. There were 3 opened in January, 29 in February, 10 in March, and so forth. Then you get row totals out to the right, and then you also get column totals at the bottom. So 15 cases opened with the date opened in January, 34 in February, and so forth. And then you get your total count here, 104. So you can see that. So for our purposes right now, I'm going to go ahead and just say I don't want to display this just to get it out of our way. All right, so that's still on the report. It's sitting there quietly. If I want to go back at some point and activate it, I can. I can also just completely delete it. All right, so the next thing we want to turn to is adding columns to a report. So this is where, for the most part, hopefully you have, feel the same way, but for the most part, the things we've been doing right now are relatively straightforward. There's things that are already exist on the report. We can go in and click on various things and change various things. But now we want to go add some columns to this report. So this tends to be the area that's the most challenging for people. And this is where most people will get stuck, especially when you're new with reports. So, yeah, we've got this great training report, but now I need to add a particular column and I have no idea where to go to get that column. So this is where, you could start off with the add column link here. So this is going to open a pop-up window. This window should look pretty familiar. So this is that second step of creating a new report we saw. So this has got, all of the things that are in your report library. So those little shortcuts that people have added. And then it's got this long list of standard columns, but it's not, as I mentioned before, all of the columns that you can report on. But you may be able to, so let's say, we want office and we want, primary advocate. So let's grab those. Again, I can click any one of the buttons on the right. So that's going to close that pop-up window and that's going to give me the option to reload. And so here's my report now with my 2 new columns here. This to me is, a little bit on the ugly side. So again, I may want to drag matter case number over here. And to me, it makes more sense to show the office first and then the primary advocate. Then we can leave the other columns as the same. Once I've dragged things around, I'll go ahead and reload the data table. And now we can see our columns here. Before we go into adding more columns, I just want to show you different ways to sort reports. So on this report, a sensible sort might be to sort it by office and then by primary advocate and then maybe by date opened. So you can do that in reports. The only trick that you need to remember is that you need to apply the sorts in the reverse order you want them to come out. So to do that, the first thing I'm going to do is take off the sorting on case number. And then I wanted assigned office, primary advocate, and then date opened. So I just need to do those in reverse. So I'm going to do date opened. Then I'm going to do primary advocate. And remember, you've got the ordering up here. So it's going to show you what you're doing as you go along. So yep, I'm doing it right. And then finally on assigned office. And you may, for example, in this case, you may want to drag, case number out here somewhere after the advocate. It's entirely up to you. But hopefully you can see now all the Carson City offices have been grouped together. Then we've got Churchill office, Patrick has got 3 cases. Maybe a little bit hard to see, but those are in order. So the 105 case, then 108, then 106, and then John Williams 2 cases, 161 and 162 are there. All right, so that's pretty exciting, right? So the other way that you can add columns to a report is through this advanced add columns link. So this is going to open up a different pop-up window. And this window actually has 2 methods in it. If you have done any work with forms in LegalServer, editing forms like your intake forms and auxiliary forms and so forth, this will be familiar. So you've got this field list here. You can scroll through this list. It's a very long list, but you also have a search and select here. So let's say, to this report, I want to add gender. So I can type gender and select it. Then I have an add button out to the right. So if I click on that, little message at the top here tells me it added gender. And I can click and, add something else. So let's say I wanted to add the client's race. I'm going to guess you're using the standard race field. I can click on add. That's added race. And let's just pick one more. Let's say we wanted client's date of birth. So start typing that, and I'll see the section down here for client. It's got date of birth, and I'll click on add there. All right, so I'm going to just click the little X at the top right of the pop-up. And now you can see, should be able to see gender, race, and date of birth have been added here for me. Now, if I go back into the advanced add columns window, and under method 1, there's this form fields only business. You're probably never going to have a use for this, but I'll mention it just in case it would be. Sometimes in your cases, you'll build an auxiliary form and it will have a bunch of fields on it. So, maybe 12, 13, 14 different fields on it. What this would let you do is come in and pick that form. So I'm just going to come down with like Spanish survey response. So let's say that, that form, somebody built it and it's got 15 fields on it. Well, you could add the 15 fields individually, or you could come down and what this feature would do is say, add all of the field elements on this form to my report at one time. So I have no idea what's on there, so I'm not going to do that. And then we need to talk about method 2. So you remember that add columns link and that add columns window? I said that's a subset of fields. It's not everything you can report on. Method 1 is the same thing. This field list, you're not going to find every field that you need to report on. Method 2 is where you can definitely get to everything that you can report on in LegalServer. You can get to through method 2. Method 2 is also sometimes a little bit overwhelming for people at first. So there are a lot of different elements in here, but once you work with it a little bit, it'll all start making sense. If you've worked with any relational databases before, you know that everything is stored on a table. A table has columns and rows of data. And so that's what the tables and the fields here that we're looking at. Columns and fields, we use those terms interchangeably. But looking at method 2, on a case database report, I see 2 pieces of information right away. One is that there are 332 subtables underneath case data. You can store a lot of different data on cases. 4 of those subtables are in use already. If I click the little icon next to subtables and expand it, I can see those 4 tables are case disposition, case type. There's a person subtable we'll come back and talk about, and then a primary assignment subtable we'll come back and talk about. There's also 545 fields that are directly on the top level case data table. 4 of those 545 are already in use on the report. If I expand the fields underneath the case data table, I can see I've got my long list here. These are not in alphabetical order. If I scroll through here, I can see that I've got, here's the first field that's on this report is the database ID field, which I didn't manually add myself. That just came in automatically by the use of the case data table itself. That, as you may recall, is in the hidden columns by default. It's just there. The report needs it to function properly. If I scroll down some more, I can see there's the matter case ID field, and so forth. So this is a huge long list. It's not alphabetized. Scrolling through it to find something would be a nightmare. So that's why we give you a little search box up here. So, I just want to add something simple, like the date opened. I start typing the word date, and I can see the list narrow down quite a bit. If I type, OP, space OP, I can see that I get the date opened field there, which of course is already on the report. So if I do the same thing for date closed, that's on there. And I'm drawing a blank on another field to search for, but I'll just search for like total time for case, which I'll just search for total. So you can see there's a magic field, total time for case on there, total household size, total number helped, a lot of other total fields here. If you want to add any of these fields to a report, you can just click on the little icons. That'll show you the field is on the will be on the report one time. Sometimes if you have some very specialized grant reporting needs, you may need the same field on a report in 2 different places because funding sources or people you have to report to are sometimes crazy, but you can do that. So if I click total household size again, you may be able to see it says it's now would be present twice on this report. If you want to delete a column from a report, we've already seen one way to do it. When you're looking at the column on the report, you can do it. You can also click the X and that would get rid of the column. So if I, for example, came up here to date closed and said we don't care about the date closed, I can delete that off of the report. In method 2, I can make multiple changes like that. So I can make as many changes as I want, adding tables, adding fields, deleting tables, deleting fields. And then that will all take place once I come up and click on the little X. All right, so let's take a look at the subtables on a report. So again, you've got 332 subtables, so a lot of subtables. I click the bar there. Now, the subtables are in alphabetical order or alphanumeric order. So you have your ones with number labels at the top, and then it goes down and we get into, the ones that start with case and then DV and so forth. You also, this has a search and select box on it. So let's say that we wanted to put case funding code. I can just start typing and then, well, let's do, I'm going to do timekeeping. So I'm going to show you a couple of other things about adding subtables. So I've got this subtable called timekeeping, multiple rows per case matter. So as you probably know, every case can have multiple time slips. And this is just giving us a visual cue to that. The other thing that I'm going to add this subtable because I want to show you is this is going to turn our report from a 1 row per case report to a 1 row per time slip report. So I'm going to click to add the subtable. So I need to select it and then click the add button. That'll just add it down here at the bottom. You can see the timekeeping subtable itself has 36 subtables. It's got 70 fields that you can report on. I'm just going to grab the time spent field for right now. And we're going to come back to method 2 here in a minute to talk about a couple of these other tables, but I just want to go ahead and close this up. So before I reload the data, notice one thing, you may notice the date closed has gone gray. That's just an indicator that's going to disappear because I deleted it in method 2. Right now we've got 104 rows on our report. Then I'm going to click to reload. And you should be able to see now we've got 228 rows on our report. And notice, for example, this first case up here at the top, it now has 4 rows. So this 0058 case, that's because I added the time spent column. And there are, if we went and looked at this case, and we looked at the time slips on the case, we can see there's 4 time slips on this case. All right, so that's why this is now, this is no longer a 1 row per case, it's a 1 row per time slip report. There's different ways to deal with, that. And so, I want to pull in time on a report, time on cases on a report. I don't want it to be multiple rows. And I can show you a couple of quick ways. You also, on some reports like this, you may want to see all of this detail. But you also want to know, okay, fine, there's 228 time slips on all the cases being pulled in this report, but I also want to know how many cases there are. That's where this little U operator at the bottom of the case ID column can be very handy. What this will do for any text column is it's going to give you the unique count of values. So this report's got 228 rows, but there are 104 unique values of case numbers, so which just translates to there's 104 unique case numbers in this report, which is what we had before we added the timekeeping subtable, and expanded the report. So I'll just show you quickly on a report like this for time spent. You can edit this column, and it's going to go off to the side. And we're not going to talk about aggregates any more than this. It's kind of an advanced topic in reports, but I just want to let you know that you do have the option to do something like a sum aggregate. What that would be saying is if there are multiple rows in a report and the only thing that's different about those 4 rows is the value that I'm aggregating here, then I just want to sum up those values into, a total. So you may notice that our report is back to 104 rows. And then instead of displaying this 0058 case 4 times, it's just once. And I didn't look at the values, but, it's those, whatever those were, they add up to 8.5 hours. So I'm going to go back into advanced ag columns. And I want to expand the fields again. And I want to talk about 2 other kind of magic subtables here. And then also we want to talk about lookup fields and lookup subtables. So this case data person subtable, this is where you would grab information about the client. So when it pulls in, for example, what are we pulling in? I think date of birth. Yeah, date of birth. That's the client's date of birth. We're also pulling in gender and race. Those are lookup fields. That is, the client's gender and race. There's other subtables under case data for pulling in other people's information. So, there's adverse party subtables, there's family member subtables, and then there's this subtable called all household people associated with the case and so forth. But the person, for client, you're constantly going to be pulling information on clients. So I always like to point out the person subtable. So if you were looking, you collect the field and you're pretty sure you collect it for, the client. So just like name, you've got this full name field here. Now, full name last first is going to appear on many different subtables, but when it comes from person, that's going to pull the client's name. The other subtable I want to point out, this kind of special subtable, is primary assignment. This one you won't necessarily have much need for because I saw you have in your add columns link, you've got the assigned program, the assigned office, and the primary advocate. And so you can easily pull those out of add columns. But let's say I also wanted to assign program, then I can pull that from here. So hopefully, at this point, you've seen LegalServer enough to know that every case has, one and only one primary assignment on it. You could have multiple additional assignments, but primary assignment's sort of a magic, specially treated thing. So it has its own subtable in reports. So I'm going to go ahead and get rid of timekeeping, get that out of our way. And yeah, I'll just do that for right now. So I'm going to close this up, refresh our data, and you can see there's the program name over here. Now this just says program name, right? It doesn't say like assigned office, says assigned office. So it's kind of, hopefully it will be obvious to people what that is. Program name would not. So you might, if you're going to have this on your report, you might, this is one of those instances where you might want to come in and change the column heading. And so just being kind of consistent there. If I had grabbed the assigned program from the add column window, that renaming bit would have already been done for me. But now in this add columns window, hopefully some of these things here are starting to make sense. So what this is telling me, this assigned office, this came from the case data primary assignment subtable, and the office name underlying field office _ name has been renamed to assigned office in the magical report library here. And these other fields here that have been added to the library, so number of people 18 and over. So you can see here case data, number of people 18 and over. So it's just telling you that's a field directly on the case data table. So let me close that up. So hopefully now if I flip back over to the reports manual, and if you come back over here, and especially if you go down into the nuggets, and this tells you, so you're like, well, I want to pull in, some address information for our clients. So I don't know where that lives. I've gone to the reports manual nuggets and I see up here clients' addresses. So I can see, oh, there's the home address, the mailing address. I've got some stuff here about these things being primary. Then I've got, some other addresses I can pull in. So I want to pull in, the client's address information. I want pull in their home address information. So hopefully this business now is starting to make sense to you. So it tells you, you want the case data, person, primary home address subtable in your report, and that's where you'll get those fields. So let's go back over to our report. And I need to go into advanced ag columns. And I'm going to go into method 2. So it said case data person. So person is already on the report. Then it said primary home address. So that is not on here. So I'm going to add that subtable. Then it said the address subtable, which is not on here. So I'm going to add that. And now under the address subtable, if I expand the fields, I can see I've got a lot of stuff here, but I can see, okay, there's the street address, city, state, zip code. I'll say I want those. I'm going to close this up. And then you should be able to see over on the right-hand side, your street address, city, state, and zip. And again, if I've made a lot of changes to my report, notice the save changes up here has not gone red. That's why I always tell people I don't rely on it going red. If I've made a lot of changes to my report, I don't want to lose those. I don't care if it shows the little checkbox, if it's blue, red, green, or yellow. I always come up and click on save changes just to make sure that I've done that. All right, so we are at roughly an hour and a half in. So usually at this point, I stop to ask people have any questions? And I don't think anything, nothing's been posted in the chat. And then B, I always then usually like to offer that we could stop at this point, and I'm happy to have another session with one or more of you all like this, and we can spend another half an hour, 45 minutes after you've had a chance to play around with reports a little bit, and if you're running into specific questions, I'm happy to do that. I can fill up the remaining half hour. Usually at about this point, people's brains are starting to get full. We're also doing this on a Friday before a holiday, which is, not the greatest time to make people sit through trainings, but that's just the timing of it. But
So there's only 3 of you on the call. Why don't you put in the chat or just unmute yourself and let us know if you want to continue on, if you want to stop, if you want to stop and have a chance to look at this, and then maybe the opportunity for another short session. Why don't you all 3 weigh in? Are you guys there?
yeah, we got a chat posted. Good to let us look at it. If need, come back.
Does anyone, either of the other 2 of you, opposed to that? Do you want to just keep pushing through? It makes no difference to us. We can do it however you want.
Okay, so we got 2 out of the 3 people are saying.
So all 3 of you are from the same office. Okay, perfect. Well, I guess we'll pause here, and then you guys just get in touch with us if you want additional training on this, and we'll see if we can arrange that.
Yeah, and if it's, easier, faster, like Stan, if you want to contact me and just say, hey, can we have another 45 minutes and we can arrange a date, and I'll set up a Zoom, and then you can invite whoever.
That's perfect. That's fantastic. Yeah, we'll do it that way. All right, Ron, thank you very much. Everybody have a great holiday weekend, and we'll talk to you soon.
All right, you too.